Comparison, contrast. Comparison. In writing, discusses elements that are similar. So when you do a comparison, you're comparing things that are similar. In other words, how are two things alike? And then contrast is when you're writing. In writing is when you discuss elements that are different. So in comparison is when you compare two things that are similar. Contrast is when you compare two things that are different. A comparison-contrast essay then analyzes two subjects by comparing them and contrasting them, or both. So either you're looking at both the similarities between two objects, or you're looking at, and that's comparison, or you're looking at differences between two objects, and that's contrast. The key to a good comparison-contrast essay is to choose two or more subjects that connect in a meaningful way. The purpose of conducting the comparison-contrast essay is not to state the obvious, but rather to illuminate subtle differences or unexpected similarities. For example, if you wanted to focus on contrasting two subjects, you would not pick apples and oranges. Rather, you might choose to compare and contrast two types of oranges or two types of apples to highlight the subtle difference between the two. For example, red delicious apples are sweet, while Granny Smiths are tart and acidic. Drawing distinctions between elements in a similar category will increase the audience's understanding of that category, which is the purpose of the comparison-contrast essay. Similarly, to focus on comparison, choose two subjects that seem at first to be unrelated. For a comparison essay, you likely would not choose two apples or two oranges because they share too many of the same properties. Rather, you might try to compare how apples and oranges are quite similar. The more divergent the two subjects initially seem, the more interesting a comparison essay will be. Compare and contrast is also an evaluative tool in order to make accurate evaluations about a given topic. You must first know the critical points of similarity and difference. Comparing and contrasting is a primary tool for many workplace assessments. You have likely compared and contrasted yourself to other colleagues. Employee advancements, pay raises, hiring, and firing are typically conducted using compare and contrast. Compare and contrast could be used to evaluate companies, departments, or individuals. The compare and contrast essay starts with a thesis that clearly states the two subjects that are to be compared or contrasted, or both the reasons for doing so. The thesis could lean more toward comparing, contrasting, or both. Remember, the point of comparing and contrasting is to provide useful knowledge to the reader. Take the following thesis as an example that leans more towards contrasting. Organic vegetables may cost more than those that are conventionally grown, but when put to the test, they are definitely worth every extra penny. Here the thesis sets up the two subjects to be compared and contrast, organic versus conventional vegetables, and it makes a claim about the results that might prove useful to the reader. You may organize compare and contrast essays in one of the following two ways: according to the subject themselves, discussing one then the other; according to individual points, discussing each subject in relation to each point. So compare and contrast, you can either do it point by point, or you can do it subject by subject. For instance, if you're going to compare organic vegetables versus conventional vegetables, first you would talk one paragraph about organic vegetables, about the chemicals, nutrition, and taste. Then you talk about conventional vegetables, chemicals, nutrition, and taste, and then you have your conclusion. This is known as the block method. And then you can do a point by point. So here you have the organic vegetables and the conventionally grown vegetables, and then chemicals, chemical, pesticide, nutrition, and taste. And then you have subject 1, organic, subject 2, conventional, subject 1, organic, subject 2, conventional, subject 1, organic, subject 2, conventional. So the organizational structure you choose depends on the nature of the topic, your purpose, and your audience. Given that compare and contrast essays and that analyze the relationship between two subjects, it is helpful to have some phrases on hand that will cue the reader to such an analysis. So if you're comparing similarities, you would say one similarity, another similarity, both likewise, similarity in a similar fashion. If you're talking about differences in contrast, you would use one difference, another difference, conversely in contrast, unlike, while, and whereas. So writing a comparison-contrast essay. First, whether you want to compare seemingly disparate subjects or contrast seemingly similar objects, or compare and contrast subjects, once you have decided on a topic, introduce it with an engaging opening paragraph. Your thesis should come at the end of the introduction, and it should establish the subjects you will compare and contrast, or both, as well as state what can be learned from doing so. The body of the essay can be organized in one of two ways, by subject or by individual points. The organizing strategy you choose will depend on, as always, your audience and your purpose. You may also consider your particular approach to the subjects, as well as the nature of the subjects themselves. Some subjects might better lend themselves to one structure or the other. Make sure to use compare and contrast phrases to cue the reader into the ways in which you are analyzing the relationship between the subjects. After you finish analyzing the subjects, write a conclusion that summarizes the main points of the essay and reinforces your thesis. Many business presentations are conducted using compare and contrast. The organizing strategies by subject or individual points could also be used for organizing a presentation. Keep this in mind as a way of organizing your content the next time you or a colleague have to present something at work. Key takeaways. A compare-contrast essay analyzes two subjects by either comparing them or contrasting them, or both. The purpose of writing a compare or contrast essay is not to state the obvious, but rather to illuminate subtle differences or unexpected similarities between two subjects. The thesis should clearly state the subjects that are to be compared, contrasted, or both, and it should state what is to be learned from doing so. There are two main organizing strategies for compare and contrast essays. Organized by the subject themselves, one then the other, that's the block method. Organized by individual points in which you discuss each subject in relation to each point, that's the alternate method. Use phrases or comparisons or phrases of contrast to signal to readers how exactly the two subjects are being analyzed. So this is the video. I'm going to stop right here, and this is the video that talks about compare and contrast. And then the next one is chapter 6, which most likely will also give you an example of a comparison contrast essay. And so I am going to go over here. So here is an example of a comparison contrast essay. Both Washington, D.C. and London are capital cities of English-speaking countries, and yet they offer vastly different experiences to their residents and visitors. Comparing and contrasting the two cities based on their history, their culture, and their residents show how different and similar the two are. Both cities are rich in world and national history. Though they developed on very different timelines, London, for example, has a history that dates back over 2,000 years. It was part of the Roman Empire and known by the similar name Londinium, and it was not only one of the most northern points of the Roman Empire, but also the epicenter of the British Empire, where it held significant and global influence from the early 16th century on through the early 20th century. Washington, D.C., on the other hand, has only formally existed since the late 18th century. Though Native Americans inhabited land several thousand years earlier and settlers inhabited the land as early as the 16th century, the city did not become the capital of the United States until the 1790s. From that point onward to today, however, Washington, D.C. has increasingly maintained significant and global influence. Even though both cities have different histories, they have both held and continue to hold significant and social influence in the economic and cultural global spheres. Both Washington, D.C. and London offer a wide array of museums that harbor many of the world's most prized treasures. While Washington, D.C. has the National Gallery of Art and several other Smithsonian galleries, London has a definite edge. From the Tate Modern to the British National Gallery, London's art ranks among the world's best. The difference and advantage has much to do with London and Britain's historical depth compared to that of the United States. London has a much richer past than Washington and consequently has a lot more material to pull from when arranging its collections. Both cities have thriving theater districts. But again, London wins this comparison too, both in quantity and quality of theater choices. With regard to other cultural places like restaurants, pubs, and bars, both cities are very comparable. Both have a wide selection of expensive, elegant restaurants, as well as a similar amount of global and national chains. While London may be better known for its pubs and taste in beer, DC offers a different bar-going experience, with clubs and pubs that tend to stay open later than their British counterparts. The DC nightlife tends to be less reserved overall. Both cities also share and differ in cultural diversity and cost of living. Both cities share a very expensive cost of living, both in terms of housing and shopping. A downtown one-bedroom apartment in DC can cost $1,800 a month, and a similar flat in London may double that amount. These high costs create socioeconomic disparity among the residents. Although both cities' residents are predominantly wealthy, both have a significantly large population of poor and homeless. Perhaps the most significant difference between the resident demographics is the racial makeup. Washington, D.C. is a minority-majority city, which means the majority of its citizens are races other than white. In 2009, according to the U.S. Census, 55% of D.C. residents were classified as Black or African American, and 35% of its residents were classified as white. London, by contrast, has very few minorities. In 2006, 70% of its population was white, and only 10% Black. The racial differences between the cities is drastic. Even though Washington, D.C. and London are major capital cities of English-speaking countries in the Western world, they have many differences along with their similarities. They have vastly different histories, art cultures, and racial demographics, but they remain similar in their cost of living and socioeconomic disparity. And so here you have, and so this is an example of a comparison-contrast essay where the writer compares Washington, D.C. and London. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me at any time. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the Professor H Writing channel.